Okay, so we're going to look at decks from March of the Machine. It's the end of the format. This is, generally speaking, a video that I like to do to remind myself of just the real high points of the different archetypes, what you want to try and be in. Ideally, when it comes back for Premier Draft or even Quick Draft to some extent, or if you're like doing a draft at your local game store with friends, especially because this is a format that a lot of people enjoyed. So maybe you've got like a box you're gonna play with in a year or something like that. So just probably quick takeaways. Generally speaking, the format was regarded as blue and black being probably the two best colors, probably blue and then black, and then depending on how you think about green and white, those might be the next colors. White in particular has some aggro decks that in the hands of expert players can play pretty well, and then black is probably towards the back, and you'll see this is so top players, given the way you can split the data out, and I took out the first 2 weeks just because that can be a lot of like exploration and maybe just abusing a deck that might be underdrafted. So this probably more reflects just a metagame that's a little just has a greater percentage of people who are more aware of what's going on. And with that in mind, it does look like some of the top decks are those decks that do have blue, like you see Azorius and Dimir, and then even Izzet. And then there's, I'm looking for it. The next tier, kind of you have like your Selesnya, your Golgari, your Boros. And you could put like, Rakdos, Gruul, Orzhov kind of in that kind of bottom tier. So all that to say, there's different thoughts about like drafting with preferences, drafting the hard way, forcing, stuff like that. I wouldn't say this is a set where you should think about forcing the vast majority of the time, but I did like to try and, if I could, navigate myself into a blue X deck. That being said, when you're drafting with people who kind of know what's going on, it's a little tougher to do that, and you might end up starting like, black, green, or white, and then look to pair it with, some other color that makes sense based on what's being open, what you're kind of seeing maybe in some uncommons that are coming late that might help you kind of build around. Like when we look at the Boros deck in particular, but also somewhat the like Selesnya deck, you'll see there are some ways to build around some key uncommons, which can be really useful in setting like a tone, a focus for the deck, and oftentimes they're cards that aren't going to be picked up by somebody else unless they happen to be in the color pair. So you can kind of reap some rewards. So yeah, that's just the thought process. And then I will say this is a format that I did well in. For Mom itself, only played 50 drafts on Arena, but did multiple like pod drafts and some team drafts. Probably another like 10 to 15 of those. And great win rate. 64 to 66%, trophying. More than a third of the time. Won Peeps and Keeps twice. Draft Club once, the eSporter event. So I feel like this is a format that I enjoyed and had a lot of fun with. So all that in mind, I feel like I can make some comments that are going to be like useful to a good number of people. So with that in mind, there are some caveats for these deck shells. We try to make them somewhat reasonable with the understanding that there were more uncommons in this set, even more rares, because you had the bonus sheet with all the legends. But I tried to limit it to 8 uncommons, but there are some where you might have more than that, and just 2 rares. I didn't say any mythics, so it's just far less likely those are going to come up. And then for the decks themselves, you may notice that we try to only have at most 3 commons that are in there twice. And those are just, commons you might want to try and focus on that really help the archetype tick. And then if there's, not 8 uncommons, then that might help us think about how deep the archetype can be at common and how it's not like an uncommon driven archetype. So like blue-white is a great example of taking the best part of white in this format, which is being aggressive, with some of the best parts of blue, which is just having good interactions, some reasonable creatures, good ways to get 2-for-1s, and just marrying them. So I'd say probably 3 of the best commons in this archetype. Probably the best from white is Aerial Boost. You can use it to win a combat early, but most of the time you're just trying to push through other damage and then use this to finish off, send something to the air, and get in the last 4 or 6 points, whatever it is, that way. But it can take out some removal like Final Flourish, the Fight and Bite spells. And then if you need to, you can use it to like win a combat, but you're ideally using it on the offensive and not trying to use it as a defensive trick, if at all possible. You're trying to turn your creature sideways to attack, though you can turn them sideways to do things like Convoke, like with Temporal Cleansing, Meeting the Mind, Halo Hopper. Because there's some, like a very small Vigilance sub-theme within this color pair, you might be able to do some Convoking while still doing attacking. And ideally, you're going to set up good attacks or have good attacks. So other commons that are really good, probably the next best common from white is Swordswing Cavalier. It's a 2-drop that you can oftentimes make it be a 3/1 first strike for at least 2 or 3 attacks out of the first maybe like 5-6 turns, and that's just tough to block. Oftentimes someone will have to like double block, and then you might be able to blow them out the aerial boost or spend a removal spell. That's probably not going to be best on them for tempo, and it's probably going to cost more than, like, you might get to Final Flourish it, but oftentimes you're talking about having to just like say you're up in a bad situation, like you may have to like Deadly Derision it or use a bite spell that you hope doesn't get blown out by like a bounce spell or a pump spell. So with all that in mind, those are the white ones. And the best common of the set, and then also very likely the best common in this deck, is Printing Champion. It's a knight, so it's going to trigger your Knight's Matter cards. Gives you a body you can use for Convoking on the ground, or for blocking if you need to be in a racing situation against maybe like another aggro deck. Gives you some evasion. There's no battles in this deck. Battles in the aggro decks generally weren't worth it. There were exceptions, but far and away the like general heuristic would be, probably have 0 to 1 battles in your aggressive decks. And other cards just kind of round this out. It's not your hyper aggressive like 1s and 2s and that's it type of deck that you oftentimes will see with aggro. But it does say, okay, I'm going to try and get something out. Ideally, you get a Weird or a Dune Shaper on 1 so that maybe you can drop a 2-drop and put some pressure on, or like Halo Hopper to Convoke out on turn 2. Or you go 1 into 2 and then maybe like a 3 and then Halo Hopper if you don't have good attacks. Yeah, these are cards that generally work well. Your 4s are meant to just be huge tempo plays, like Bola Slinger to put this on a creature you already have and open up attacks for your whole team probably. Protocol Knight to, tap something down and give it a stun counter and open up attacks for maybe your whole team. Or get a wide board with like Knight of New Coalition that helps you Convoke out. Creatures have Vigilance, so they can also Convoke after attacks. That's only really useful for Meeting the Minds in this deck, but you could do it after attacks if they don't do blocks on like a Halo Hopper or like a Temporal Cleansing. It's not really a post-combat type of thing. And then we do have probably the best rare in the set in Sunfall. And you might say like Wrath and an aggro deck, like that's a little weird, but you've got their life hopefully so low enough to where if they come back and you can't push through, you just Wrath, you get your Incubate token, you kill them the next turn. And if you get like an awkward start, they have a lot of removal, you're going to play a little more defensively, it's a way to come back in those types of situations as well. Yeah, so that's blue-white aggro. Now there is a blue-white control deck that has many of the same cards, but definitely plays a different type of game. So again, you're looking at a Sunfall, but this is a deck where, yeah, Chrome Host Seed Shark, you're going to play it in the other deck, and it's probably going to be as good as the Zephyr Singer, maybe a little worse because you're trying to be a little more aggressive, but this type of deck where it just shines because you can actually play your multiple non-creature spells to make Incubate tokens. You can protect it with cards like, Angelic Intervention, or like a Cyber Cryptomancer. You can play it a little later and hold up your mana for tons of instants, tons of interaction. And then you're trying to use like Seed Shark, Wrath, with just really oppressive cards like, Artistic Refusal, Dispersal, some White Essence, and Cyber Cryptomancer to make it really tough for your opponent to truly do much. And then eventually you're just going to like maybe win in the air or just overwhelm them, give all your stuff vigilance with wrath, make your tokens big. We'll see again, Breeding Champ is great. You're probably going to prioritize Dispersal a little more in this deck. It's still great in the aggro version, but we're going to be sitting back a little bit more. So it's good to have interaction that you can even, play with a single blue mana open. So you can use your mana effectively, surveil to what cards you need to try and get. Maybe even get to tap stuff with the Wrath to draw a card. And then Assimilated Essence is a great play on 2, great play on 4, great play on 6. Like it's useful throughout the entire game for the most part. And you can always get incubated if you really need to. If you just can't counter something, you have to get like a creature for whatever reason. But a ton of instants. So you can leave mana open to flip incubate tokens, tap with Wrath, and stuff like that. So yeah, it just this can play a slightly more aggressive game, but generally speaking, you're not trying to do that. And oftentimes you'll have a blend between the aggro and the control versions, just because that's the way it works. You can't necessarily draft all the cards you want to get, but this is the way to kind of design the deck where you're leaning into playing a longer game and outvaluing an opponent and using your evasion and card advantage to kind of win the game. Next up is a deck that I tried to almost never play, though I did have a really nice version of White-Black where there was Luris as a companion. You just got to do some super silly stuff with, like sacking, your rat, just replay it to get rid of cards in their hand. Sacking your Scornblade Berserker to draw cards, replay it. All sorts of just crazy stuff. But since it's tough to open Luris, this is a version that's more focused on just playing a slightly longer game, trying to have good card quality, and just heavy on the interaction. So ways you can win are just Sunfall and Breach. But your uncommons are generally pretty strong. You have one of the best uncommons in like Nord's Inquisitor, and some pretty good black uncommons like Thallid, Nightmare, Repurposing, and Berserker are all probably 4 of the top 5 black uncommons in most archetypes. And then from there, cards that there's 2 of for Nezumia Forant to try and set up a blocker earlier. Maybe you can sack it to Scornblade Berserker or Scroll Shift it or tap it for a Nightmare, bring it back on seal. But try and turn this into a 2-for-1 if you can. Final Flourish, so you don't get run over and can kill stuff later. And then Deadly Derision. So this is very removal heavy, and it's more on the black side. There's kind of supplementing with some white cards that are fine in this type of archetype. So like, it makes sense there, so you can double spell and they can't. Cut Short for defense, Grasp for defense, Inquisitor, all around good card. It's not an archetype I really want to be in, so I would try and pair black with anything else, but this is what it could potentially look like. Next up is White-Red, and I'll say that the real reason to be in this archetype is Rayav. Like if you see, one of these, or maybe even like 2 of them, try and get some equipment in there, just try and get some bodies, get some interaction, and just beat the opponent down. Obviously, you want ways to try and protect Rayav, because this what's gonna, the card that starts to drink, as it were. You need to keep it alive. So I would say prioritizing cards like Air Boost to keep it alive can be really nice. You could play like Angelic Intervention in here as well, though I think you can be aggressive enough to where you might be able to like get a Rayav, attack with something, boost on that turn to push like 12 damage maybe, and that's that. In terms of equipment you would want to play, Beamtail and Beatstick is probably the best common equipment, and it's probably better than Greatsword in the majority of decks, because it can make treasures so you can continue to play your threats. It does give you evasion with Menace, So a creature that maybe you've given double strike that's bigger, it's just really tough to block a menace double striking creature. Court Halberd's fine. Remoting Greatsword can be good if you've got multiple rouse reinforcements to be able to get out earlier and then have creatures to put it on. But if you don't have that, it's kind of whatever. And you want the curve to be lower. I've tried to play 17 decks and 17 lands in many of the aggressive decks, so there's a lot of things to do, but I'd say you can possibly get away with 16 in this deck if you have a low enough curve and you have some things that help you, like rummage with like the spite or the scrounger, make some treasure with the beat stick, not have too many mana sinks. I say that knowing we have equipment, but oftentimes if you can get that out and you can keep it on a creature, it only takes a couple attacks, and that's kind of it. And I say Valduk is fine in this deck. It's not like an all-star like Rev is, but it's fine. And then, yeah, the cards we have two of are boosts, so you could have Angelic Intervention in here, then reinforcements to have creatures to put it on, our equipment on, and then Spite to be able to clear the way for good attacks or set up really awkward, double, triple blocks, especially if you have like forcing them with the beat stick with Menace. And yeah, just try and get your curve low, have, at least 3 equipment, and just put the pressure on. Okay, white-green. So you are, in some ways, trying to lean into the counter strategies, but it's not necessarily backup. A lot of times there will be backup, and we'll look at like the Sentinel as like an example of that, or like the Bowl Slinger. But some of it is just saying like we have incubate tokens, and that is, counters that are put on another permanent, so it can like proc your Brawler. You can put extra counters on with your Call Me of Whispered Hopes. You get an extra counter with like your Inquisitor. So that's all around really good. And you're trying to play just an aggressive deck. So with that in mind, some people might say like Weird Thespian that doesn't order counters well, and that's true. But what it does do is it says I'm attacking for 3, on turn 3, and I'm going to smooth your draws out, and I'm going to make it so you have to make some awkward blocks. Same with Aerial Boost. It's just a combat trick along with Adaptation, which are 2 of the better combat tricks we've seen in the last year, that makes you can keep attacking. And then cheap interaction, like a Grass, just get a creature out of the way. Hunger to get a creature out of the way. 3 mana isn't cheap, but, this is pretty reliable going to get a creature out of the way. And then you just try and keep your curve low and put the pressure on as early as, turn 1, 2. And you have some mid-game, like you've got the Converter Beast, the Tangled Skyline, maybe a Glistening Dawn if you're lucky to try and push through. And just try and go in the aggressive. The way you would get into this is, getting a Botanical Brawler when you're already like deep green or deep white, and like pack one like, pick 5, pick 6. And just kind of see if it's open there. You could also open a Galton Mavern and then just go from there, but this isn't this is a fine deck to be in, and I did all right with it, but it wasn't a deck that I felt like held up as well as maybe I hoped it would. It might have been that I just wasn't playing it quite right, or got some awkward draws against some decks that had a lot of removable, but you want to try and be aggressive with it. Blue-black was the deck of the format at the start of the format, and then it slowly, as people recognized that, and it got a little cannibalized by more people drafting it, it became, still like a top 2 to 4 deck, but kind of got passed by white-blue. And then in some pods, you could even find, other decks that you would rather be in based on getting like a key uncommon or rare that you could build around, because you knew 1 or 2 other people were going to be in this color pair. Almost assuredly. But there's tons of good uncommon and commons, and rares, particular rares and mythics on like the black side, but there are some good blue rares as well. and you just try and play a longer game. You want a game to go, 9, 10, 12, 15 turns with this type of deck, because you can get your 2-for-1s. You can get your interaction, take care of other bombs that they might play, and you can kind of take over. So key cards that I found were real useful. Obviously, Printing Champ, because it gives you a threat, some evasion, and maybe you can, flip a battle, which your ideal battle is, at least one Invasion of Amonkhet. Final Flourish, so you don't get run over. And then Deadly Derision, or a Forest Dispersal, so you don't get run over. And there's been some argument about Dispersal versus Derision. I think you could probably say just, you want as many of either one of these you can get. But if you have to choose one to have 2 of, I actually don't mind having 2 of the Derision if I've got, 2 Final Flourish, because I can maybe get the early game set up with these and actually have harder removal. And then use this just to blow out things later, get rid of a big bomb at instant speed, no less. But yeah, you play a more defensive game. You're trying to get something down early so you don't get run over, because that is how this deck can lose, is you don't have a 1 or a 2 drop, or you're on the draw and you don't get to assimilate essence anything, or you're playing Final Flourish on their good 2 drop, their 3/1 2 drop, and they play a 3 drop. And so there's definitely ways for this deck to lose. But if you can get set up, you can get to the mid game, to the late game at a good life total, reasonable board presence, good defensive speed. It can do really well playing on that card advantage. So here's a deck that did improve as the format went on, in part because red did tend to stay open for the majority of the format. And then if blue-black was being taken and blue-white was being taken, you might get like some blue cards and you compare them with the red that's kind of open, and you're having like reasonable red power that goes all right with the blue if you're trying to do the Convoke plan. You can play a more aggressive version of this deck. And this is kind of how this one's landed, but there are more controlling versions that really kind of lean into just, getting some creatures out there and holding up things like Artistic Refusal or Interaction and Instant Speed, and, pecking in with like, Printing Champions or, Skyclave Aerialist, things like that. But this is a slightly more aggressive version of the deck. It's not fully aggressive, like we're still playing home Chrome Host Siege Shark rather than like Zephyr Singer is our blue rare. And we still have like Artistic Refusal, which is just bonkers in the deck, whether it's aggro or controlling. But in terms of cards you want multiple of, Arouse Reinforcements is great because you're getting 2 bodies out there that you can use for your multiple Convoke spells, whether it's, Meeting, Cleansing, Stoke the Flames, Artistic Refusal, whatever. It just helps a ton for that. Volcanic Spite, so you have good interaction that's cheap at instant speed, so you don't get run over. You can set up a blowout potential against your opponent, and then Printing Champ, obviously. And then beyond that, you're just trying to play Convoke cards. There are versions of this that would have like a Tetsuko. The 1/3 makes creatures that power toughness 1 or less unblockable. Really good when you're playing like Tetsuko and Rotting Dread Ships to make it like a 4/1 unblockable. If you have a Tetsuko, ideally you want at least 1 Cyber Cryptomancer to keep it alive, so you don't just get blown out. Like they kill or balance your Tetsuko, and then they make good blocks when you're like 1/1s, 3/1s, 4/1s, whatever. Barring that can be a good strategy. And otherwise, you're just trying to get some threats down, convoke out some cards earlier, or like end of turn, in response to your opponent doing something, and then win with either like some evasion, some face damage with a Stoke, or maybe just getting their blockers out of the way through bounce and interaction to be able to swing through. So yeah, that's a way to play this deck. Okay, blue-green was a deck that I enjoyed a lot. Oftentimes it's not just blue-green, you're splashing, black in this many times, but maybe white, maybe red. We'll look at a more 5-color green deck. But if you're doing a more true 2-color blue-green, probably one of the better ways, if not the best way to do it, is leaning into playing a longer game with some good defensive speed and a lot of incubate, where you can just hold stuff up at instant speed. You can flip tokens if you don't need to use your interaction, like your Cosmic Hungers, your dispersals with Might Essence, cards like that, and then trying to get card advantage. You could, and actually probably what should be in here is a, what's it called? Corruption of Tawashi. It did play very well to give you card draw, so you can keep the, gas flowing in a deck like this. Also, Omen Hawker, this is just its absolute best place because, you're going to have so many incubate tokens you can flip, or even some flip cards like Captive Weird or Instructor. Be really good. You can even use the ability to land cycle your Ancient if you need to, but ideally you're really holding this on after you get an Emoti in play to get some value. Because like Artistic Refusal or Ancient after an Emoti is just fantastic. But yeah, this is a deck where you want the interaction, Cosmic Hunger, because you're going to be playing a longer game. You want some evasion and creatures out there like Breeding Champ, because you do want to be able to, convoke Arctic Refusal, or have, a chump block on the ground. You can, keep attacking. And then you probably could put like another Dispersal, Eyes, Converter Beast, some White Essence, any of those in here again. Even a Thespian to kind of have some good defensive speed, and trade up with, a good 2-drop or maybe even like a 3-drop. So that's a way to do this deck that is oftentimes, it can tip a lot sometimes, but usually it's trying to play more mid-range value type of game and place a lot of stuff at instant speed and, flip your incubate tokens. A deck that was fun to play, but really was like, you need your uncommons and even like your rares, was Black-Red, but you would oftentimes, if nobody else was in this, you could like wield these Invasion of Azguls or Stormclaw Ragers because they don't fit great in other decks. Same with Jury. You can get this Furnace Rains because no other deck wants this. And you just try and load up on a lot of interaction, a lot of cheap creatures. Like get your Final Flourishes, your Nezumi Informants, your Volcanic Spites, even like your Rouse Reinforcements if you need to. Because you don't mind having fodder to put a beat stick on, or sacked like a Corrupted Conviction if you need to, or sacked a Stormclaw Rager to get through your deck more. All those are just great. And this is a deck that can use its mana. So like even though the curve's really low, because you're looking at maybe some equipment, maybe some sacking, things like that, you want to try and play 17 if you can here. Yeah, there are other decks that are a little bigger, like they've got some 3 and 4 drops, and they try and lean into that type of space. I didn't find those to be as successful, but I'm sure some people can probably play those well. But this is just interaction, try and get some 2-for-1s, try and set up some value engines, if like the Razor, the Azgul, a flipped Major Mercadia, and just go to town. Okay, last 2 decks. Black-green. You'll see there's not a red-green deck. It's just not a deck I think you want to play in the format. And I only played it like maybe once, and it's not even here because I'm not quite sure the best way to play it. It's probably not Battles. Though I've seen some people have some success with that. It's probably not the way to do it. But Black-green, this is more defensive-minded. You try and get card advantage, get bigger creatures with your incubate tokens, hold up interaction, and try and find a bomb or 2 that you're playing towards. And this is a great one. Almost any of the black rares or mythics are great as well. Cards you would want multiple of. Again, Final Flourish, almost definitely. Probably Cosmic Hunger to give you some more interaction because you want to do stuff at instant speed. Flipping tokens, doing interaction. And then you could put in like more Weary Thespians or Nezumi Informants. Pest is fine, but it's not great in this deck because you only have a few things you're usually looking to flip. You could have also multiple Converter Beasts. You can try to be a little longer. This is, fodder for you to sack to a Flourish and then a 5/5 token to flip. It's kind of like Chimney Rabble, but a slower version. This tends to be a more mid-range controlling type of deck. And you can kind of splish splash in this some as well. And then last is 5-color green. And I say 5 color, it's probably just a multicolor green. There's no red in this version, but you'll see there's more uncommons because you can probably pick up more uncommons when you're picking better cards. And just take the best rares you can, find good fixing in Blight and Burgeoning, Vital Eraser, Dual Lands, and just play good cards. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.